My name is Bill Stone, and I'll take you on an expanded tour of historic downtown Covina. But before we do that, I'd like to show Rancho La Puente, which was acquired by John Rowland and William Workman in the 1840s. It was about 49,000 acres, about 8 or 9 cities on it today. It goes from the San Gabriel River through the town of Walnut and parts of San Dimas and Pomona, and from the border of Whittier all the way to San Bernardino Road in Covina. Now, as time went along, Ron Rowland, who owned this property up here, as it was divided equally between the two families, he had property between the 10 freeway and the San Bernardino Road. And it went from basically over near Baldwin Park all the way into parts of San Dimas and Pomona. Well, in 1873, John Rowland passed away. So soon afterwards, probably within a couple of years, his wife Charlotte sold 5,500 acres to the Badillo brothers, who had come up from Costa Rica. Well, they tried to grow coffee here. Unfortunately, it was not successful. And due to lack of water, and of course, there wasn't the proper climate. So they stayed here probably up to maybe 4 years. And then the property went into foreclosure. And John Hollenbeck, who was a banker and real estate developer, decided he would come in and pick up the property, which he did. So now we're going to move ahead and probably until 1882, when Joseph Phillips came to the area, fell in love with what they call the Azusa Valley and wanted to start a city. So he acquired 2,000 acres from John Hollenbeck, and with the idea that over 5 years he'd pay for the property with crops that he would grow here, which he did. So he hired a fellow by an upcoming engineer and surveyor by the name of Fred Eaton to come in here and do the surveying of the township area for small businesses, property, and of course homes. It would go from 1st to 4th and from Puente to Italia. And so also the rest of the property would be in 10-acre sites where people could grow crops like citrus and grains and the like. So the important thing that he did, of course, was to bring water to the area, because without that you don't have anything. So basically, after the property was finished, as far as the surveying went, and by the way, I should mention a little bit about Fred Eaton. He became mayor of Los Angeles in 1900. He's the one that actually talked William Mulholland bringing water down from the Owens Valley for the city of Los Angeles, so very important in the history of Los Angeles. But getting back to Joseph Phillips again, once the surveying was done by about 1885, and they actually founded the city in 1886, actually, he decided to come up with a name for the city, and they actually came up with the name Covina, which we believe comes from the fact that there were a lot of recesses or coves around, and wild grapes were growing, so Cove of the Vineyards, Cove of Vine, Covina. So that's, we think, how it actually happened. Well, then he decided to hire 2 newspapermen by the name of Conley and Short and come in here and actually start publicizing the property.
On the southwest corner of Badillo,
started out with a facility down around Puente and Citrus. Before that was the Union Oil the southwest corner. Getting back to the time Citrus and 1885, when the Covina Independent was on this corner, they actually produced a paper which they sent all over the country to encourage people to come out here to sunny Southern California and make your fortune, get away from the cyclones and the freezing climate of the East. Well, initially people did start coming out, but we didn't have a railroad station at that time, so they came through the Puente Southern Pacific Station initially. But 1895, we now had our own station here in Covina. But we're going to presently talk about the most historic part of Covina, which is the 2-block area on Citrus between Badillo and Italia. About 60% of those buildings are at least 100 years old, about 25% into the 1920s, and the balance since that time. But before we talk about that section, let's look at the northeast corner and going along Eastway, I should say, on Badillo. Beyond what is now the Covina Center for the Performing Arts was an alleyway, And then one of the early post offices on the ground floor and the home telephone company up above, which started early, in the 1890s. And then next to it was the Covina Argus, a newspaper that was here from the 1890s through most of the 1950s, actually. And then beyond that, where Wells Fargo Bank is now, was the first hospital in Covina, the Covina Hospital, which was the Bemis home initially. And then if we go across 2nd Street, still on the north side, and go down about 150 feet, we come to the Pacific Electric streetcar main station in Covina, because the streetcars actually came to Covina in 1907 and eventually went from Los Angeles all the way out to San Bernardino. But there's images here, of course, of the post office, as well as the more modern ones, and of course the Bemis home as well. As far as the south side of Badillo, east of Citrus, we had a theater, market, apartments, and of course on the corner we had the Bell Auslander General Store, and that later in 1921 Urban Reynolds built his Buick agency there, and then of course he eventually moved that down in the 1960s to where he is presently on Citrus Avenue further south. And at that time they tore that down and became an office building on the corner, which you see here. I might also point out in one of these earlier photos showing Reynolds Buick, and you can see a gas station right on the corner there it's really the southeast corner of Badillo and Citrus. And you can see a car getting ready to get some gasoline. And the Covina Theater was in there. It came in 1921. And you'll see a banner across the street advertising Jackie Coogan and My Boy. It was a new movie that came out and actually was released in 1922, and looking up Citrus toward the mountains. Well, the Covina Performing Arts Center here on the northeast corner was originally the Reed Building. It was built in the early 1890s as a one-story building, and by 1900 became a two-story building. And one of the early occupants on the very corner was a hardware store, and by 1905 was the Covina National Bank. Not the first bank in Covina, but the one that lasted the longest. Matter of fact, it lasted into the early 1950s and had moved eventually in time to the northwest corner of Citrus and Badillo. But the Reed Building is a very fascinating one, even though it grew by topsy gradually. We had the Covina Furniture Company, a fellow by the name of Custer. As his orange grove was growing and to maturity, he was very handy at building furniture and the like, and started selling the furniture that he'd build, as well as others that I'm sure he would purchase. And then he finally started to build caskets. And he had his own mortuary in the rear of the building. And then eventually he acquired Oakdale Cemetery in what is now Glendora. And I imagine he probably also had built cradles too, so he could have cradle to grave. So that was quite an enterprising gentleman. He actually started in 1893. And of course, the present location of Custer and Christensen is further south, of course. As far as the building to the north of what is now the Covina Center for the Performing Arts was what we call the Allison Webb Building, goes up to the alleyway there. It actually started at the alleyway in 1903 and kept going south, and eventually joined up with the Reed Building and actually used the common wall of the Reed Building, which created some structural problems later. But that was a very important building because it not only had the Griffith Brothers Milling Company on the alleyway, but it also had Clapp Drugstore that was there for many, many years, and other drugstores became there as well. And Broadwell Department Store, the first important department store to come to this valley, was there as well. And what we should do is probably walk across the street, and we'll talk more about the Griffith Brothers Milling Company. Well, as I mentioned, they came here in 1903. They actually grew many, many products, and of the grains, probably barley and wheat, on their ranch south of Francisquito Road between Paso Covina Road and Azusa Avenue, where Azusa Avenue now actually went further than Azusa Avenue. And we'll go across the street and talk more about the Griffith Brothers Building Company. So why don't we do that? Well, before we go across the street, why don't we talk about the northwest corner of Citrus and Badillo. That building was built in 1897 by Frank Chapman. He had an orange grove up around Cypress and Grand Avenue. His name probably isn't quite as well known as his brother Charles, who founded Chapman College in Los Angeles and moved it to Orange. And of course, the streets in Fullerton and Orange are named after Chapman. But this building actually, and an earlier photo here, we see Nash drugstores on the corner, but we also see the wonderful Pacific Electric streetcar that came here in 1907 and eventually went out to San Bernardino Road. You notice that the pavement has not been put down for the streets. It didn't go until 1911, although sidewalks went in 1904. I love this photo because it shows the different modes of transportation. It shows a horse and buggy, shows a bicycle and an automobile as well. But Nash Drugs is very important. They were there for quite a while. Matter of fact, they had a home they built in 1908, a Craftsman home up on San Bernardino Road on the south side between 3rd and 4th. And their family was raised there all through the years. But in about the middle or to late 1980s, the Covina Intercommunity Hospital wanted to expand, so make a parking lot. So the Covina Valley Historical Society was quite interested in acquiring that house. And they said, well, you can have the house as long as you pay to move it, which they did, and they got permission from the city to actually put it on the west side of the main park on Valencia. So it dates a good 100 years old presently. And we give tours there, the Historical Society does, on the 4th Sunday of each month from 1 to 3. So we certainly invite you to do that. And here's a picture of the Nash house as it actually was on San Bernardino Road, and looks pretty much the same except maybe some of the landscaping as present location on Valencia. But looking up the street on the northwest corner and up north on the west side there, that first building beyond the, let me back up just one moment and mention that when the Covina National Bank moved over there, they were there probably until the early 1950s. But anyway, the building just to the north of it, where Strike-A-Pose is presently, is a bit different, bigger building than the one just adjacent to it, even though it looks the same. If you go to the rear, you'll see there's a different size and so forth. We see dates of 1885, and I suspect that that's probably the date that the actual property was purchased, because it's hard to believe that it was built earlier than the Chapman building, but it's certainly possible. And as time went along, here's an aerial photo, basically, well, not aerial, but at least an overall photo looking north in the mid-1950s. The bank had already left on the corner there, but you see Faye's Maternity Shop, where Strike-A-Pose is now, J.C. Penney. They were here many, many years, and by the early 60s, they also disappeared. You'll see Finch Jewelers. They came here in 1904 and put the clock in 1916. And it's been a jewelry shop ever since, even though it hasn't always been the Finch Jewelers. And you can see all the rest of the way up the street as too. As a matter of fact, you can probably see a little bit of the Methodist Church just to the right and behind the